In this video, we're going to be drawing the kind of objects you'll find all around you if you're out and about urban sketching, working our way up from simple gradually to more and more complex objects, all whilst using the same clear four-step process. The great thing about this four-step process is the same principles will apply no matter the number or complexity of objects in our scene. And that means that there are two great reasons to watch this video. Firstly, these kind of techniques are what I will use if I'm just sat somewhere and I want to create a sketch in a couple of minutes and have fun and relax. Secondly, by practicing objects like this and working up the complexity, suddenly it becomes easy to fill our grander sketches, our big scenes, with life, with busyness, and with all these little objects which we might otherwise never have practiced. So, without further ado, let's start. Let's just dive in. Oh, and by the way, all the references I'm using are linked down below, and I'd love you to join in as well. The first object we're going to have a look at is actually just going to be this very simple bottle of ink, because it will let us demonstrate the ideas that we're looking at today. So, what are the ideas? What are the steps? Firstly, we have shapes. So what are the shapes in my bottle? Well, I've got a square and then a kind of rectangle. Now these lines are a little bit rigid, even though they're still quite loose, they're still bold and straight. What we want to be doing when we draw our first shapes is thinking about the texture. So this lid has actually got sort of ridges on it. So my first square, I want to be suggesting those ridges already, not a clean square. The line itself is a little bit lighter as well, keeping that lightness at the beginning. Then this isn't really a rectangle, it's a rectangle with its shoulders cut off, and it's quite grubby and old. This bottle's been around for a year or so, it's been used and it's covered in ink, so we can give that a more characterful edge to show that. But we're still not there, because we've really flattened this out. We've forgotten that even objects have perspective. And I know, yes, boo, perspective. But there you go, it's everywhere. So we just got to embrace it sometimes. So I'm looking down at my bottle and I can see the top of the cap. And that means instead of a flat shape, I've got these curves coming round. So I can see these curves. And this is going to be the same for my actual ink bottle itself. It's got a curve and ellipse at the bottom. And we'll be doing a few ellipses coming up as well. We'll talk about getting those right later. And now we've got a much better idea of this, from flat to less flat to with a viewpoint. And that's our shapes. Next, we start looking at the internal shapes. So here we've got like a label, as well as a little lip at the bottom where that label doesn't quite get to the bottom. We've got the sort of shape of what's drawn on the label. So we've got a woman. I'm going to do this as very basic shapes, really simple rectangles and squares, keeping it loose. There's little black parts of the label. I can turn those into simple shapes on the label. And there's also some writing. And we can include that if we want. It's effectively a shape. It's just one we instantly recognise as words. We also have in this step textures. So this ridge texture here, the kind of grubby textures. If we're being cheeky, we can even smudge some of our ink to get that grubby feel. And then we have light and dark, which is going to be built up through the use of textural marks like hatching, whether that's straight and linear or curved to follow, in this instance, the form of our object. Both are perfectly acceptable, and we'll look at more of those as our objects get more complex. But this light and dark is really important to get at this stage. And then that's step 2 done. So we've done our shapes, we've made it interesting, a bit of detail. Step 3 is we sort of regather our structure. Getting that bold line, the darkest darks maybe with our bold line. And this bold line is is both showing the shadow coming on this side. It's also kind of showing the weight, all the weight where it sits down here, where these objects interact. We've got dark shadow again, keeping variety, not going over the entire line, but collecting the line where it's a bit untidy. And suddenly we have an interesting object. Now the last thing is a bit of context. So the classic thing is, look, this is a floating bottle. Why don't we pop a little horizontal or diagonal line, maybe a shadow on the ground, and suddenly our bottle is not floating. It is related to the ground. And we'll look at different ideas for that in our complex objects as well. Now, with our 4 steps ready to play with, let's start playing. Our next object. This is a little breakfast scene. This time what we might do, because it's in a sort of odd view, we might just check with our pen what are the kind of angles, and we can find the bottom of the croissant almost straight across the page, slight up tilt, and the sort of right side of it is actually almost vertical. And with that in mind, we can put a little dot to remind ourselves. And within this tiny framework, this triangle we've drawn out, suddenly we can find the kind of, well, curving shapes that form the bulk of the croissant. It comes over and around, something like that. Really loose, really understated, remember. Not trying to do too much. And there we go. It doesn't look like much yet, but don't worry, it will soon. Coming behind, we've got a bit of context we could add already, which is this kind of fork. So we'll pop that in. And it's on a plate, which kind of cuts off the nose of the croissant here. And look, we're going early into our context because of how it sort of sits on our page or in our photo or in the scene in front of you. We can get the shape of that little glass in there as well. Like that, we have step 1 almost done. Just got to finish off the plate. Step 2 then, bit of texture, a bit of internal shape, bit of light and dark. So let's start with the little darkness which sits underneath our croissant where we can see the edge. And then this time we've got a more complex object. We might want to do, instead of just straight hatching, this kind of spherical hatching coming over the top, which matches the form of our object. So instead of just it being rigid and straight, it's slightly curved. Going with that slightly curved, well, croissant. What else have we got? Well, let's do a tiny bit in our coffee glass. I don't want to do too much. The more we do over here, the less the scene will become about our croissant, the more it becomes about the coffee. Our little fork as well, that can have a bit more darkness to it. And of course, look under here, under our croissant, really dark. And here, maybe we just do a tiny bit of cross hatching. Good way of really building up the darkness. And then on the plate itself, a bit of vertical hatching. And these changes of direction help, at least for me, to determine flat surface, vertical surface, just splits things apart. So we've got shapes, we've got that kind of internal texture, we've got the context already. So now, bolder lines. So we can use those bolder lines, bit of darkness to bring our scene together. And this is where those really scratchy shapes that we had in the initial sort of scene don't matter. Because what we're doing is we're reinforcing the ones which work and bringing our croissant to life in this stage. The initial light lines are there to guide us like a little framework. But when we come back with these bolder lines, they're going to fade away into the distance. They're not going to matter, which is why we know it's going to be okay to leave them really, really gentle. We don't need to be doing too much in that early stage. I want my fork again. I've worked on this fork too much, haven't I? Keep mentioning it. A little bit bolder. And a little bit sort of, well, just a little bit more presence from that boldness. And then this little cafe, this little cup can have a slightly bolder edge as well. And again, look, we can neaten up, we can ignore that little looping line. It becomes a little loose part of our sketch rather than something too bothersome. And there we go. Object number 2. Okay, so here's an important one for, especially near me in Cambridge, but in a lot of Europe as well, and a lot of cities and towns across the world. A bicycle. Now, bikes can feel really scary, but it's because we see all these tangled lines and we forget shapes. There's also a challenge here with circles. Circles are hard to draw, but here's my breakdown of a bike. First, we have a triangle. To keep it nice and gentle, follow the sort of approximate lines of that triangle, but it is a triangle, and that's the bulk of the frame. Behind that, we have another triangle. Get the approximate angles of that, okay? And we're in business. Above that, here we can't actually see it, but normally a seat would be something nice and simple, like a triangle. Here we can sort of see they've got I think they've probably got their hat in a bag on top of their seat. So we've got an almost helmet-shaped thing, haven't we? But looser. Then, what do we have to finish off our frame? We have just a line with our handlebars. And our handlebars are not complex. They're just often in an awkward perspective. Now just line up. Here's one sort of set of axles. So where's the other set going to be? We can line it up neatly there. And then we fit our wheel in that gap. And just to get that sketchy feel and avoid making an imperfect circle, don't even try for a circle. Just make it a little bit geometric. Instead of drawing a circle, draw like an octagon. Little geometric marks here and there. And actually you'll find, as you build it up, you can do a couple of layers to get the inside and the outside of the wheel. You get an average of a circle, but it also has a kind of sketchy feel. Then, instead of drawing every single spoke, just pick a few, get them balanced across the page. And like that, you'll sort of almost have your bike just from simple shapes. There aren't so many textures here, but we can kind of invent some. We can find light and dark coming on the frame. This bit of the frame's much darker, so I'll do some of my little hatching in here. Underneath here, we've got a pannier, haven't we? Or a pannier rack, and so there's some darkness underneath, and there's also darkness in around the spokes. One more shape to find, which is the kind of chain guard and the chain here. We don't need to spell it out completely. And then we add our bolder line, and perhaps a couple of the details if you want of the frame, but just be careful not over kind of complicating what we've got, which is a very simple set of shapes that if we just allow it to be simple, don't try to be too perfect, we'll have that sense of a bike. And I think that one works okay. Again, we can add our context. Here's our kind of horizontal line, which is the edge of this bridge. We can even add, these vertical structures which show us that we've got verticality in our scene as well. And if you want, let's pop these railings in as well. Why not? It will make things more complex because we've got lots of competing lines here, but it also gives us a better idea of the context of the bike. Now, bikes can be challenging because of the perspective, so it's worth just trying. If you want to add them in a scene, just trying a few. Get another reference photo up, find your triangles, your not quite circles, and see how loose or specific do you want to be about your shapes and your scene. For me, if this is going to go in the back of a scene, a couple of bikes just really gently inked in, following these like complex perspective ideas, that's going to be enough for me. What I don't want to do is make them look really wrong by trying to make them perfect and right. But if I'm just being sort of loose and expressive with my lines, they can kind of just emerge on the page really gently. Now, here's an interesting object, isn't it? In fact, it's two interesting objects. An old thing and an old thing. We've got an old camera and an old suitcase. But we know the drill here. We start off with our shapes. So, what we got? Circles. Now, but instead of trying to draw a circle, I sort of approximate it into a geometric shape, into something more like an octagon or a hexagon, depending on the size and complexity of the rest of the scene. Then we've got the camera body. What's that? It's a rectangle. And here we've got a little bit of perspective. So one thing we can do is pop our pen on our reference, find the angle, and then just cross-check it against what we have in our scene. And then we can end up getting the angles about right. And that's what we're after today, about, which I think is good enough. Then we got little shapes on top, which are important for just mapping in the main shapes of the scene. Anything else? There we go. Underneath, we've got a rectangle in really steep perspective. There's another one where just checking the angles here. These lines are nearly vertical. If we just double check those angles, we'll get it about right. And then on top of that, or behind that, we've got our suitcase lines, which come all the way around. Again, check these angles. Look, these ones are now going so steep, they're going outwards. And that is perspective, which comes into play a lot with our urban sketching, doesn't it? But it also comes into play in objects, especially when we have an object which is close to us. Exactly the same principles as with streets, just with the object being a smaller scale. And here we go, I'm just kind of getting in those smaller shapes at the same time. And we can then add light and dark, can't we? So light and dark and textures. So I think there's a bit of a shadow under here. Let's find that shadow. There we go. We can add some sort of stitching along here. It's quite a nice texture. Same here, nice texture for this stitching. Bit of a shadow underneath our book. And then, oh, there's a lot of texture on this camera. And that's quite important for that oldie feel, isn't it? So I've got lots of little dots just to get that, it's very recognisable, isn't it? The old sort of ergonomic grip. On these dials, then we end up with a vertical, looks like we've got ridges on it. Here we've got some really dark windows, probably the viewfinder. And underneath, we've actually got a really smooth area. So I'm just going to mark that in with a bolder line. Same kind of here, bolder line for that smoother area. A little bit of pretend writing. Now, what we do, we add our bolder lines. Now here, I'm actually going to start with our suitcase, just because it feels easy to collect. And when I say collect, I mean easy to sort of refine those shapes. And I think it will just work. And from there, we'll be able to work out, right, how much do we want to add to the camera to make that the focus, or is actually the suitcase the focus? There we go, almost there with that. Got our book. Here it kind of lifts up, get a bit more darkness under there. And then our camera. So I'm going to make the camera quite bold. I have decided I want it to be equal, I think, to the suitcase. So we'll do that with a really bold line, pulling out hopefully these little features. And I'm going to double down. I added some light textures, but where it curves, I'm going to double down with some extra marks so we get the idea of that sort of curve. The same here. So there's our lens. With a little shadow behind it. is there any shadow here? I'm going to invent one. I'm not sure there is, but I'm going to invent a bit of shadow and a little bit of writing on our book as well. Okay, any context here? Well, the photo doesn't have context, but what we'll do the classic still life angled line that runs through the scene with a bit of kind of perspective on the surface and a little bit of perspective behind with some just simple vertical lines. And a couple of oldie worldy objects come to life on our page. Really simple, really easy. Now, if you want even more objects, let me know what you would like to see. I filmed loads extra for these, so I've got more videos up actually on my new Patreon, which I'm sort of soft launching. Well done if you found about it by listening here. And on my YouTube members, which I'm going to switch over to Patreon in the next few months. But very happy to make another free video as well. So let me know what you would like to see. Thank you very much for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this, don't forget, I've got a free course which you can join, which plays with these kind of ideas as well as watercolour ideas. And loads of people who join that free course go on to take my more in-depth paid courses and seem to have a pretty lovely time doing it. So I'd love to see you over on sketchloose.co.uk if you fancy it.